I move that City Council direct the Executive Director of the Housing Secretariat in consultation with appropriate staff to continue seek vacant hotel and apartment units until every person in Toronto in need of accommodation has been offered housing. And 2, City Council requests the federal and provincial governments to provide the City of Toronto with the necessary tools to offer housing to every person in need of accommodation, including the expropriation of vacant hotel and apartment units under the authority of Section 3.1C of the Federal Emergencies Act, funding for the necessary social supports for housing Torontonians, funding to acquire and/or lease the necessary units, and approvals or funding for necessary harm reduction measures. Speaker, everyone on this council, everyone in Toronto, believes that every human being needs a home to live with in dignity. They need safe and secure housing. There's not a one of us who doesn't believe that. The question is, are we doing enough to achieve that? Before I get to that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible work that has been done by Toronto City staff. The number of people that we have housed this year and the current report proposes to house is truly remarkable. And I want to acknowledge also the role that Mayor John Tory and Deputy Mayor Anna Bailao have played in achieving it. Everyone at the City of Toronto has stepped up and done remarkable work. But the fact of the matter is, this report shows that it's not enough. That the desire that every Torontonian has, that all of our sisters, brothers, neighbors, friends, family have access to safe, secure housing has not been achieved by this report. And it's because we don't have the tools. Let's take a moment and reflect on some things that were said in answers to questions asked by Councillor Layton. Right now, 3,200 people are staying in shelters in the City of Toronto. 300 people are staying in respite care, and 500 people are sleeping on the streets. That's 4,000 Torontonians. The report you have in front of you says that by the end of March, we can provide housing for 500 households, and that by the end of next December, we can provide housing for 1,250 households. In other words, the plan that we're about to approve will leave 2,500 households facing another winter, having to choose between living in a shelter or living in a tent. It's not enough. It is absolutely not enough. Now, a couple of arguments have been made about why we shouldn't do this. The first is that we can't expropriate quickly enough. Let's be clear how that would work. Today, city staff are aware of over 1,000 hotel units, I know that much, that are vacant. I've made them aware of a building in my ward where there are between 150 and 200 rental units that are vacant. Together, we could come up with enough to house everybody. We could submit that list to the federal government in days. The Premier of Ontario, the way the legislation works, would need to say that he concurs with the idea of the federal government using their emergency powers. He could write that letter today. The federal cabinet, the federal legislature does not need to meet. This is a cabinet decision. They could meet next week, launch the emergency powers, and pass the necessary regulations to begin expropriation or temporary use proceedings for the properties that are necessary. By the beginning of January, we could be beginning to do the work to get the supports in place, because we would need the Premier and the Prime Minister to listen to our demands on supports as well. We could be housing people by the end of this winter. By the end of this winter, we could be achieving what all of us have voted for, which is the simple, humane acknowledgement that housing is a human right that every person in our city should enjoy. I have a lot more to say on this, but I see I'm running out of time. I thank you for your consideration. This is one of the most important decisions we will make collectively as a council during our term of office.
Thank you.
Please support my motion.
Can you clarify the second part of your motion about expropriation? I understand we're getting a what I'll call a substantial amount of money from the federal government for housing, and the other largest city in Canada, Vancouver, is also not going down the expropriation route. They're looking at getting loans or grants for housing from the federal government. So I'm a little concerned if that's what Vancouver is doing and that's what we've been doing to date, that the federal government wouldn't agree to expropriation powers for Toronto.
Well, first, just to be clear about the process, I'm not asking the federal government to give us the power to expropriate. I'm asking them to employ their power. They have the ability under the Emergency Act to move for the requisition, use, or disposition of any property to assist in dealing with the emergency. The reason why I want to go that way is very simple. The report you have in front of you says that even if we do everything that is laid out within the city's powers today, we will have upwards of 3,000 people still living in shelter or on the streets by the end of this winter, and we will have upwards of 2,500 people still living in shelters or on the streets at the beginning of next winter. As to whether the federal or provincial government will do this, let's be very, very clear. Just yesterday, Mayor Tory gave a remarkable speech on an issue that was in front of us and talked about over time how his position had evolved. It's not the first time he's done it. It's one of the things I admire about the mayor. In moments he will reflect and change on his opinion. You can't get the federal government or the provincial government to change their opinion on this if you don't ask for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam.
3 minutes clarification of the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillor Parks, I've been looking everywhere for any kind of legal precedent in this country where a body of government has expropriated individual hotel rooms. I'm just wondering whether you found something that I couldn't.
I'm not certain. I haven't checked. I know that there have been moments of emergency when the federal government has used emergency powers to legislate. It was different legislation. This legislation came into effect in 1998, I believe, or 88. So you would have to go back to previous laws that they had before this one. And I know for a fact that they've expropriated property, for example, during World War II. So it is very clear. Further, the general expropriation powers that even the city has or the province has, not the emergency ones. I'm aware of an example in my ward right now where Metrolinx is expropriating the parking garage of an apartment building in order to build pedestrian access between the UP Express and the Dundas West subway station. So expropriation is a very, I won't say common, but it's used often enough that we understand how it works.
I guess my other question is, sometimes these are emergency rapid response ideas that you're putting forward, but
yes,
expropriation can be a messy, legal, court-based, drawn-out process. I fail to see how your motion is going to expedite helping the homeless.
Well, allow me to explain them. There are the general expropriation powers, which you're familiar with, that are messy. And as the mayor described, I think it was 2 days ago, it can take 12 months to 18 months to accomplish. That's why there's a separate piece of legislation, which is the Federal Emergencies Act, that allows governments in moments of crisis to move faster. And you literally, the federal cabinet, with the concurrence of the province of Ontario, said, we think it's an emergency that people are having to choose between going into a congregate setting and they're afraid because there have been outbreaks of catching COVID, or sleeping outside in sub-zero temperatures and risking freezing to death, or as we've seen, catching fire, that's an emergency of sufficient magnitude to say to people in a society as wealthy as ours that if you are sitting on vacant hotel or apartment building units while people are dying on our streets, we are going to put them to use as housing. It can happen in a matter of days. Now, I know it's longer than that because we would need to do some work to condition the units and train staff or hire staff to provide supports. And I absolutely take the point on supports, but the legislative framework is there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.